Yeah, very good morning, Syed Akbaruddin garu, and also I welcome all the participants of Alumni University of Hyderabad and other faculty members and other colleagues that would join here. May I request our Vice Chancellor to say a few words before the meeting as a welcoming address to the guests and all the participants. Sir, please.
Thank you, Prof. Prakash, and good morning, Dr. Syed Akbaruddin, and all other alumni and other participants who have joined this interactive session with our distinguished alumnus of the university. And today, we have chosen this Saturday, and we have requested Akbaruddin ji, and then he has kindly agreed to interact on this day, so that many of us will have an opportunity to spend time sufficiently on this day. And I was briefly telling, for benefit of all those alumni who have joined today for this interactive meeting and all others, I just wanted to tell that this university has grown rapidly in the last 45 years of its existence, and we are recognized as the institution of eminence because of the contributions of the faculty who have been there for the last several years, for at least 4.5 decades, and the students who have graduated from this university. All of you have made this university a proud university, an institution of eminence today, along with several IITs and Institute of Science, and also with the distinction of being the youngest and the smallest institution of eminence. And in another 24 months, I want all of you alumni who have joined this today in this group, periodically please visit this campus on a regular basis, and you see to yourself the transformation that this university is going to take place, the transformation that is going to take place in the next 24 months. And for those of you who have not been able to visit in the last 10 years, already you would find a lot of change in the university that has happened in the last 10 years. So I don't want to take more time. I want to give more time to Akbaruddin ji to interact with all of you. And before Dr. Akbaruddin speaks to you, I would like to first maybe request Professor Prakash Babu on behalf of university and on behalf of Alumni Association to say a few words of introduction. I know he doesn't require an introduction, and he is so popular. And I see the present head of the political science, Manjari, also joining the group. He has been with your department in the early days. Now I will request Professor Prakash Babu to introduce the guest to all the participants on this meet.
Yeah, very good morning, all of you. It's my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Syed Akbaruddin. Though it doesn't require any introduction, but for our satisfaction and for the young generation to know, I would like to briefly, a couple of minutes, I will introduce. So before that, let me introduce myself. As our Vice Chancellor indicated, I joined in the university in 1987, and I completed my studies in 1992. So then later I became faculty at SV University. Then I returned back to the University of Hyderabad again. Currently, I'm working as the professor in biotechnology. I'm also in charge dean for the School of Medical Sciences. So this is the brief background of the of myself. And we have been taken up. We formed, and though it's a association was not formed, but a few years back we formed into an association of this alumni, and we are involving the alumni in the university activities. And once in a year, we are organizing the alumni meet during the year-end festival of the students. It's called Suku. And also, sir, we are also inviting the distinguished alumni for the to deliver talks in different various schools. Apart from that, sir, one of the important contribution of this Vice Chancellor, we introduced the Vice Chancellor introduced the Distinguished Alumni Award. So for the last 1 year during the convocation, so one of the couple of the alumni will be identified and they will be felicitated during the convocation. So this is one, sir. So and also we are getting a lot of encouragement from the administration to organize such a kind of event, and we are proud that you are the first one to deliver online talk because of various reasons. Though we would like to have you in presence, in the campus, your visit. I introduce Ambassador Syed Akbaruddin. He's 1985 batch Indian Foreign Service officer who served as India's permanent representative at United Nations at New York. He has previously served as official spokesperson of Indian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In his distinguished career spanning over 34 years, Akbaruddin has served in different capacities in India and abroad. Starting his first foreign assignment in Cairo, he also served twice in Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, Jeddah as Consul General of India, and he is rightly considered an expert on the West Asia issues in India. He headed the External Publicity and Public Diplomacy Division of Ministry of External Affairs in the capacity of Joint Secretary to Government of India. He was also the Chief Coordinator for the India-Africa Summit in October 2015. He later served as Additional Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. Subsequently, he was appointed as India's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York. Syed Akbaruddin was born in Kerala to Professor Syed Basharuddin, formerly the head of the Department of Journalism and Communication at Osmania University. Professor Basharuddin headed the department for many years. Later, he served as Indian ambassador to Qatar and also served as the Vice Chancellor of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University and also served as Director of the Research Wing of the Film and Television Institute of India in Pune. His mother, Professor Jiba Basharuddin, was a professor in the English department at Sri Sathya Sai University, Prashanthi Nilayam. Most importantly, sir, Sri Akbaruddin, sir, did his Masters in Political Science from University of Hyderabad during 1980-82. He is one of our proud alumnus. Sir, I thank you on behalf of the UH Alumni Association for accepting to interact with the UH community. And also I thank the Vice Chancellor for constantly encouraging these alumni activities. So, and also I request all the participants to send your questions to through messages, and Professor Pramod Nair is coordinating that at the end of the Sri Syed Akbaruddin's talk. So please, sir, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prakash Garu. Thank you very much, Dr. Appa Garu, for sparing the time and engaging with all of us. It's always very nice to see that the institution that you grew up with, have fond memories of, is doing so well. Ever since I came back to India, I see regularly news about the University of Hyderabad, and it makes me proud. I must congratulate you from what I saw in the last few days that the University School of Life Sciences received a grant, I understand, for something like 50 crores spread over 5 years. Also, in that short time that I've been back, I noticed that that annually you are figuring very high amongst the universities of this QS ranking, which is a global ranking of young universities. And then I also noticed that the University of Hyderabad consistently figures amongst the top Indian national universities in the National Institutional Ranking Framework. So all this, I must confess, I gathered only in the last few days that I've been here. So obviously you're doing good things that in the 45 days or 50 days that I've been here, I've been able to gather so much of information coming in the newspapers. Congratulations to you, your team, and for you to engage in this trying to bridge between the past, the present, and the future of this university. We all owe a lot to our alma maters, and I certainly do, because but for the university, I wouldn't be where I was. So I will always remember with great fondness. I've never been to this lovely campus, so I put on a background photograph because it's been 35 years or so since I left Hyderabad. I rarely ever came here, only for a couple of days. So I must say, been blindsided to the developments that you have narrated. But it makes me feel very proud to be a part of this growing institution. So I wish you all the best in that. That said, let me start with a confession. And that confession is that, when I was a student, I come from a background where both my parents were professors. My grandfather was a judge. So they were not civil servants. And the general feeling in our family, even my great-grandfather was again a lawyer, was not a judge. So the general feeling in our family was that to be an intellectual was better than to be a civil servant. And so I must say I'm the least qualified in my family. As I said, they all come from maybe 4 or 5 generations of people who've done intellectually much more rigorous work than I have done. So the usual joke that we always would share was, and I think I would share with you that to understand where I'm coming from, and this was usually, which was the oldest profession? And so the feeling was there was a doctor, there was an engineer, there was an architect, and then there was a civil servant of who would be the oldest profession. And the doctor would always jump up and say, first there was chaos, and from that, God made Adam, and so he was a doctor first. And then the engineer would say, well, yes, there was chaos, but before making Adam, God actually engineered the world, and then he became a doctor and he made Adam, so the engineer was the first profession. Then the architect would say, well, yes, there was chaos. Then God actually designed the world, and then the engineer made the world, then he engineered the world, and then he made Adam. So that's the sequence: architect, engineer, doctor. And so the civil servant sits around and says, well, if you all agreed that there was chaos first, who created the chaos? It's the civil servant. So that was the feeling, that civil servants create chaos rather than contribute in a productive manner. So I'm grateful that many of you think differently now in terms of the possibility that all of us in our own ways can contribute to our environment, to our people, to our society, etc. That said, I would like to also tell you that I have no great wisdom. It's just that I've been through this before. So in terms of my knowledge, I've just had opportunity to have done that and been there. So all I will share with you is some experiences of my own rather than any great knowledge, because knowledge certainly is not the preserve of the elderly. It is the young who are increasingly able to gather knowledge in many, many more forms than we did during our times. I also must say, I always am a great believer in that change happens not by choice, but sometimes by chance. I never planned to come to the University of Hyderabad. I must say that, like all young people, I thought the JNU was the best choice to go to. So I went and wrote that exam there. And at that stage, the scholarship was, I think, something like 100 rupees if you top the exam. So I got that scholarship and I decided I will go to JNU. And my father was very much against it. He felt that I would, in pursuit of my passion, be diverted to interests other than academics. So he said no. And so I was very upset, and I thought, can these 100 rupees help me for living for 1 month? I would then decide to leave and go. at the same time, I wrote the exam for the University of Hyderabad, and luckily, I landed up with the same 100 rupees in Hyderabad. So I then had a choice of staying with my parents and 100 rupees, or not staying with my parents and spending the 100 rupees on my well-being, whatever it was in Delhi. I don't know why I opted for it. I opted for the University of Hyderabad, perhaps in deference to my parents' wishes, but I don't for a moment feel that I did the wrong thing then. Because when I walked through the university, we were only 12 of us in a class. This was the second year in which political science was introduced at the university. And the first year there were only 6. The second year there were 12, which was 100% more. But by the standards of most universities, this was very small. But what we gained was personal attention of a very distinguished faculty. Many of them, I consider them to be so distinguished that I've continued to be in touch with them. Dr. Shanta Sinha, for example, a leading social rights advocate. She taught us about Indian politics. Dr. Rajan Harshe, who later went on to become, I think, the Vice Chancellor of the Allahabad University, he taught us international relations. Dr. R.V.R. Chandrasekhar Rao, who was perhaps the most gifted professor I ever came across. We also had another professor called Professor Masaldan, who had already been the Vice Chancellor of the University of Lucknow before he came here. And then we had Dr. Shishir Bhattacharya, who taught us political theory. We were just so fortunate to have these 5-6 professors interact with us on a daily basis. If I had joined somewhere else, I perhaps would be one of the 50 or 100 students in a class, never having had the opportunity to interact and imbibe and digest all the thinking of these teachers. Sometimes small is beautiful. And in my case, certainly it was beautiful. 12 to a class, focus attention, good time to spend in the class and outside the class. I must also confess, most of my time I spent in the Golden Threshold. The University of Hyderabad, the present campus at Gachibowli, was to us a far away place. We visited it to pay our fees. We visited to collect, to pursue some administrative issues, or to play cricket matches. But even then, for example, the Central Instrumentation Lab was one of the most outstanding of its type anywhere in India. So I'm grateful when I listen that you saying that you are benchmarking yourself against the best. So that tradition of the life sciences, the physical sciences, the chemistry department of benchmarking amongst the best was a tradition that is now as old as the university, even though at that time the university was very young. It still is young by standards of most universities. But it's still so happy to know that that you maintain that tradition. The one thing that I've learned being in the university and outside is that almost all students who I know, at the end of their careers or at the culmination of their careers, have done much better than what we thought we would do when we were students. We never thought we would end up where we ended up in 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. So obviously, there is a feeling of doing better than what you expect. And that's a general feeling. I must say, I met so many students who studied with me, some who remained in Hyderabad while many of us traversed all around the world and came back. But they've done as well or much better than all of us. So in general, the drift is that you will do, or your generation will do better than the generation before. Even if academically, sometimes, as I said, I am no match for my parents, whose academic qualifications were much better. But in terms of doing well in the world, I think we are in a generation where it is now the trajectory is that we do better than the past generation. And that's because the initial foundations that we are being provided are much better than what were being provided previously. I also must confess that everything that I did was a matter of passion. So sometimes when you don't get your first choice of the university, you perhaps get the first choice of the person who you'd like to marry. I and my wife Padma both studied as political science students in the university. Perhaps I would never have met her. I would be half the person that I am if I had gone to JNU. So life works in different ways. It's not always by choice that things work out. You can call it by chance. You can call it by luck. You can call it good fortune. You can call it God's grace. There is something more than human endeavor that works for you if you follow your passions. And I must confess, when I was in the university, of course, I did study, but I was also involved in many other things other than studying. I still remember one of the times I visited the administrative building was when there was a protest against a case of sexual harassment in the university. Being a young student, obviously, I was passionate that universities don't fall prey to such cases. So, in many, amongst many others, also, I recollect a good friend of mine from them, but now I understand he later became a professor, etc. I haven't been in touch, is Professor Kodan Ram. He, I, and many others participated in trying to get justice for this young lady. Also, we were then taken by the police to the Rangareddy police outpost. The then police superintendent, later on, who I got to know very well, also took all of us, kept us there, cooled us down, and then released us. And my father always was very worried. He said, "You will never get into civil services. Now you have a police case against you." But to be fair, the government of India is not an unfair and unjust institution. It understands the passions that the young sometimes get carried away with, sometimes the desire to do better and have a better environment. So none of these experiences would have been possible for me but for the environment and the opportunities that were provided by the universities. So I would always tell everyone, if there are any young here, that please follow your passions. If you do not follow your passion, work becomes a drudgery. If you follow your passion, life is but a song, because every day you work with passion towards something that you are happy with. So to me, international relations was a passion that was ignited in the University of Hyderabad. Prior to that, many times I thought that why should anybody learn about international relations? It is more important to learn about the political situation in your state. So I must confess that when I had an option in my undergraduation of a choice between international relations and the politics of Andhra Pradesh, I chose the latter. But when I joined the University of Hyderabad, I had professors who talked to me of the bigger picture, who made me understand that you don't need to get alienated from your roots if you look at the world as one family. So my passion for international relations goes back to the University of Hyderabad. And for that, I will always be grateful to those professors who were there. And the last thing that I would like to share before I open up myself to any questions that you would like to ask on anything is that please be confident of your own intrinsic value. We all have a value which cannot be crushed, whatever may be the circumstances. And I remember a story. This was told to me when I was in college or in school. When we were leaving school, one of my teachers said that, and I'd like to share that as an abiding faith in human value. And that is that, again, these were times in the 1970s. Many of you were not born. If those who were born were small children. But 100 rupees was a very big amount. And the teacher brought a 100 rupee note and he dropped it on the ground and asked all of us, which of you wants that note, although it's fallen down? All of us raised our hand and said, yes, we want. Then he took the note, crumpled it, and then threw it down again. And he then asked us again, which of these want the 100 rupee note? And we thought, well, of course, the 100 rupees is perhaps now equivalent to maybe 10,000 rupees now. And we all said yes. Then he stamped on it and said, now do you want it? And we all then said yes. Then he took the note, folded it back, put it in his pocket and said, if all of you young people think that a 100 rupee note doesn't lose its value, because even if it is crumpled and jumped on and spit on and thrashed, remember that there will be times when you will have difficult situations, you will be in difficult circumstances, people may not agree with you, you may think that you are the pits, others may think it is, but don't lose confidence in yourself. Remember, as human beings, you have an intrinsic value and that will prevail. So my last piece of advice to the young is that don't give up on yourself. There is always more time than you think there is. And I have said this before, I'm a great believer in what the Indian cricket captain Mahendra Singh Dhoni says. You may think that time is up, but there is more time than you think there is. There will be more opportunities than you think there are. Just bide your time, wait for the opportunities and do well. And I'm certain, following your passion, people will do well. That's all I have to say in generic terms, because I owe it to my alma mater to say that the passion that was ignited in me maybe 40 years ago, 37 years ago, still remains with me. I owe it to the university. So when I was asked by Dr. Prakash Garu, I immediately agreed, because what we sow, so we reap. And I am a beneficiary of the University of Hyderabad and will always be there to help out in any small way that I can. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, Pranay.
Yeah. So, yeah, Pramod, can you?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I just want to check with Pranay. Pranay, how do you want this done? Can people send it in by chat?
Yes, they are anybody sent by chat, or I'm also monitoring the Facebook questions if there are any.
Right,
so
right.
I'll be sending them to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Akbaruddin, for that very personalized talk. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to share some of that journey. A lot of it we can only envisage, because most of us have come to this campus. Some of our teachers, I'm an alumnus of the Department of English, University of Hyderabad. Several of my teachers recall Mysore Cafe, Nampalli Road, and the Golden Threshold. I think Professor Podile is here. He's working on a project to reorganize the Golden Threshold as well. for us, it has been a major heritage point around which the university has grown. We have we have comments that have come in, and people have been saying they're very elated to listen to you. So I'll offer from my side thanks to Professor Appa for thinking of how best we can involve the alumni over the years, and Professor Prakash Babu for heading this. But yes, it has been an interesting experience listening to you. I mean, of a period that many of us are completely unaware of. You know? The 19th century thinker said, even I went to a university, but I did not let it interfere with my education. Clearly, that has not been the case with you. You know, yes. So, Pranay, can you please share anything that has come?
I'm just looking through the questions, sir.
Yeah. I'll read out a comment which has come from Mr. Srinivas Reddy. I feel elated to join you all in this program. It would be nice if many more join in such programs. My thanks to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Appa Podile, and Professor Prakash Babu. Wishing the Central University, my alma mater, to scale greater heights. Okay, somebody has sent a question. It just says from Lenovo Tab Beaten. So I'm sure working in international relations, you are aware of several of these kinds of protocol systems. The question is, what does he think of the current foreign policy?
So let me try and explain to the gentleman who's asked about foreign policy. Number one, we should take it for granted that foreign policy is not a private enterprise. It is by nature a government-led enterprise. It is also a collective enterprise in the sense that the government tries to collect the best ideas that are available and then channelize it into action. So we must give time and space for the government to act on foreign policy. What I can tell you is in terms of perspective of my own period. 35 years ago, when I joined the Foreign Service, between then and today, the world regards India differently. Obviously, it regards with much more respect than was the case 35 years ago. And as I said, this is true because even in our own personal lives, we've seen that Indians as a people have grown perhaps more wealthy. There is a burgeoning middle class. There are people who get attracted to India and many other things. I will not get into those things. So if I have to analyze the trajectory of the growth of India's foreign policy, it's been on the upward trajectory. We may have an issue with X, we may like Y, we may fancy something much better, but please remember, India is like a big ship. It moves in a very considered manner. So it's unlike a modern gadget that we have today. For example, if we are all used to smartphones, we update smartphones very quickly. In the night, it says Apple 1.02 version is available or something. We press, by next day morning or in 10 minutes, it's available. We update ourselves. Foreign policy, by its very nature, can't do that. So it moves in considered ways. It builds on the past. So whatever we are today is based on all of independent India's achievements. So if I have to say foreign policy today, we are in the right direction. We built on the past. We've moved ahead of the past. And we have only to be optimistic of our place in the world today than what was the situation in the past.
Ashish has asked how the University of Hyderabad has impacted your worldview, and how has the university, by and large, influenced your foreign service career?
So I still use some of the quotations that my professors use. I must admit, when I used to sit and listen to Professor Chandrasekhar Rao and his quoting Tennyson, I still remember. So many times when I talk of change, I use the quotation he used on old order changeth, yielding place to new, and God fulfills himself in many ways, lest one good custom should corrupt the world. This is, I don't know, 37 years ago. I picked it up from him.
Memory.
I still use it because it is so appropriate in times of change that you can use one of your professors' thinking. Again, I learned political philosophy through one of the best teachers who understood political philosophy, Dr. Syed Bhattacharya. He always talked about the Hobbesian view of the world and life being poor, nasty, short, and brutish. Today, look around. Global situation is one where life is, even if you don't say life, but it is brutish, short, nasty, and poor, because each one is competing against the other. This is Hobbesian philosophy of the 16th century, which Professor Bhattacharya taught me. I still feel that what he said made so much sense to me in my job all around, always. I learned from Dr. Rajan Harshe the interest in Africa. Growing up in Hyderabad, Africa was a very distant place. Yet, Dr. Rajan Harshe, who had done his PhD on Africa, made me realize what Africa was all about. Some of my best friends today are from Africa. Some of my most memorable memories of working in the Foreign Service relate to Africa. I was, once upon a time, we held a summit of India and Africa in 2015. For the first time, 45 African presidents and prime ministers came to India. Of course, it's not a very glamorous process, because if a US president comes, everybody knows. If 45 African leaders come, not many are interested in, but it is the future. It is a continent which is of immense potential, human and other resources. So my passion for Africa continues with that. My desire for social justice is what Dr. Shanta Sinha taught me. She is today a leading advocate of child rights. She won the Magsaysay Award for her activities in pursuit of freeing children from bonded labor. In many UN fora, I try and use some of the thinking that imbued her interest in the rights of children, the goals of children, and how we need to approach these matters. So for me, without the University of Hyderabad, there would not have been a foreign service. There would not have been my understanding of some of these issues, which lasted for 35 years and still remain in my memory.
Thank you. Professor Vinod, you had something to ask.
Yes, this is Professor Vinod Pavarala. I teach in the Department of Communication at University of Hyderabad. Ambassador Akbaruddin actually sounds too formal for me because I somehow feel that I've known you for a very long time. And I'll tell you why. Let me start by making a little personal connect. I followed you to Golden Threshold a few years later, and did my master's in sociology. But prior to that, my earlier master's, my first master's, was in the Department of Journalism at Osmania University. And Professor Bashiruddin was my teacher and mentor. So from Bashir, as we used to call him, always spoke about you and his children very proudly. We have visited your home right behind Arts College, and so somehow I feel that we have known you, and there are common friends in Nizams, and people like Somshekhar and others. So we have known you and followed your very distinguished career in external affairs very closely, and we are really happy to have you back at the university as a distinguished alumnus. Of course, I also I'm friends with Ruxana, so that there's a lot of connections, and we really hope that you will be back in Hyderabad and be a part of the intellectual, social, and cultural life of this city, and we can hope to see you give back something to the city with all your background and the experience that you have gained. But one question I have at the end of this comment: your father also served as an ambassador, and I was very much in the department and in my early career as a journalist when Professor Bashiruddin left for Qatar as an ambassador. And then you became an ambassador yourself. I just want to ask you, what's the difference between somebody who is a career civil servant, trained to be a diplomat, becoming an ambassador, and people who are referred otherwise, not derogated necessarily, but as political appointees. And has that trend come down now, making political appointees as ambassadors? And what's the distinction between the two that you think? What do they, bring to the plate?
Thank you very much, Vinod. So I will call you Vinod,
Yes,
and
yes.
you can call me Akbar.
Yes.
Yes, we missed each other, but I do remember some of the leading teachers there. Professor Ratna Naidu used to
Yes.
teach sociology
Yes.
at the Golden Threshold. And I remember Dr. Meenakshi Mukherjee, who taught English
Yes.
there. So these were all people who've done so well for themselves as academics. Coming back to and thank you very much for jogging my own memory about my own growing up at the university campus. Because now when I go there, I went some years ago, I find it a very different place, but it was one of the best places to grow up from. Now coming back to the specific question you've raised, and I think what we need to understand is that when you represent India, you represent India in all its diversity. So if there is talent available outside the Foreign Service that can be useful in promoting our interests in a specific area, we should not shy away from utilizing that talent. Especially because 35 years ago, when my father became ambassador to Qatar, the Indian Foreign Service was a sort of a closed club. It perhaps still is, but it's a little bit more open than it was. When I joined the Foreign Service, my father was then ambassador to Qatar approximately at that time. But the first question, one of the then ministers asked all of us, how many are from St. Stephen's in Delhi? And in my batch of 12, there were 4 from St. Stephen's, there were 4 from Delhi Law Faculty, there was 1 from IARI Pusa, and then there was 1 from All India Institute of Medical Sciences. There were 2 of us who were from the rest of India. Today, or even then, India's diversity is such that a closed club cannot represent India in all its hues and dimensions. So if we bring to the table something new, it's always of value. Today I find that some of the youngsters bring to the table talent which we never brought in our times. There are people who have done chartered accountancy, people who worked in investment banks, people who are architects, all these are joining the civil services in keeping with the breadth of our country. That's why the number of people applying for those jobs are also growing up, because talent today is much more diversified than it was then. So bringing talent from any place is good. That said, always a system and a culture is developed if you work for a long period. Now, one of the reasons why the Indian Foreign Service perhaps does much better than many other services is we all know each other for 25, 30, 35 years. Right from the time we joined to the time we retire, everybody is on first name terms with their juniors, with their seniors, etc. So there is a work culture which we all imbibe. Sometimes it does become difficult for people coming from outside to adjust to that work culture. And so since you studied with my father, you know that he wouldn't come to office before 12 o'clock in the morning. This was his norm. He was a classical professor who would study and read till late in the night, 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, whatever time, take his nice sleep, only come 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock sometimes. He could arrange his classes when he wants because he was the head of the department for many, many years. But he brought to the class a talent which was not available for people like me who come. My USP that anybody who's worked with me is I'm always there in any job, in any work that I worked is 15 to 20 minutes before office opens. Everybody says, why are you doing it? You're making our life miserable. But this is my USP. My father was very different, but he brought a different skill to the table, which I bring different skills. So sometimes there can be these difficulties but then you have to make way and give scope for talent because the talent that comes with that sort of experience is very different from the talent that we can bring to the table. So I think India in its diversity requires more talent. It requires more opportunities for lateral movement of people because gone are the days where we can say we know everything and the others don't know. Today, when we grew up, we had to go to university, library to understand and gain even factual information. Today, a smartphone can tell you all the information that you need to know. So what teachers and adults bring to the table are values. Information is something that is broadly available. You can find it out and you can game the system and do it. But values and continuity are essential ingredients in any system. And that's what people with talent can contribute and bring to the table.
Thank you. Thank you.
Two questions. Thank you, Professor Vinod. We have three questions lined up here. One is a question on your experience while working at the United Nations and interactions with China. The second is your work experience in Egypt and Saudi Arabia. So we'll take these two first. Both are what your experiences in two different parts of the world. Yeah, Mr. Andres.
Right. So at the UN, the United Nations is not an enchanted place. All of us look at it as something which is fair, not unjust, trying to do the right thing by everybody, etc. But many of us who worked there, this was my second stint there. And in between, I also worked with the International Atomic Energy Agency for 5 years. So for about 10 years, I've worked with international organizations. Now, China is an interesting case. When I first went there, the Chinese were very quiet. They would not speak up much. If they spoke up, they only spoke up for themselves, not for others. On the other hand, the Indians were very different. we wanted to speak up on behalf of all our friends all the time. Sometimes, if it is in our interest, yes, but sometimes even if it is not in our interest, we speak up. So there is a difference in the approach to what is in our interest and what is in their interest, how they perceive it and how we perceive it. Number one. Number two is China has over the last 30-40 years grown at 8%, and so they have far outstripped everybody else in terms of their growth rate, and they have amassed a huge amount of tangible power. Yet the soft power that we have is of a different kind. That is because as we grow up as Indians, we learn to live with plurality, we learn to live with differences, we learn to live and let live. That's the nature of our society. To be Indian is to be accommodative. In China, 90% or so are Han Chinese. So they speak a very similar language, they eat similar food, their habits are different, the characteristics are different. So they are amenable to a different way of thinking. We are amenable to a different way of thinking. But in my opinion, increasingly, China is overreaching itself. And it happens to the best of people because you think that now your time has come. Sometimes it may have come, sometimes it may not have be correct. So increasingly, what is happening is it does what big countries are supposed to do. They will twist arms, they will use every sort of allurement to try and get their way done. Now, it works sometimes, it runs into difficulty some other times. And if you do not have the soft skills to parlay your hard power into soft power, you will land into difficulties. The US for many years has learned that it is not always good to only use hard power, or the West in general. The Chinese have still to learn that. And my own interaction with them is that as diplomats, many of them, now we talk of this concept of wolf warrior. Very aggressive, very thing. But this concept was already there. For all of us who were working at the UN, we could see it. And that's why when they pushed for having that discussion on Jammu and Kashmir in the UN Security Council, it did not go very far because many others understood that this was a power game. And they were not acting as honest brokers, but pushing a power. And, sometimes as diplomats, we get to know many more things than even if you're not inside the room. But I always feel that like a cricket dressing room, we should leave those things that happen in the dressing room out of what happens on the cricket field, because in the dressing room, people say things, do things which are perhaps not palatable outside, but it helps if you work with friends in a friendly manner. It helps because people help you in very different ways. And that's what helped us tide over what was a difficult situation from August to, I think, January. We are not members of the Security Council, but every time China tried, they landed up in a place worse than what they had landed up before. They tried 3 times they didn't succeed. But this is not to say that they are a power on the rise, and they are a power that we will have to contend with and have to work out our own approach to them in different ways. Coming to Egypt and Saudi Arabia, they're very different countries. In some cases, Saudi Arabia is opening up and changing, unlike what you may see. I have seen Saudi Arabia in very different circumstances. In 1988, it was amongst my early postings. When we went to Saudi Arabia, they were strongly opposed to outside forms of information, that if you had a dish on top of your house, people would come and try to break it down. If videos were given, I will tell you this and you will understand what it means. Indian films are popular, and the Indian diaspora, wherever we go, we want to watch Indian films. Those were the times of the video. So we used to get the video and watch. And there was a film called Tezab. I don't know whether you know of it. This was Madhuri Dixit's famous film where she sang Ek Do Teen or something, which was a very popular hit song. And I bought the video, I watched it, and I came to India. And then I said, oh, this song was very popular in 89 or something like this, or 90, I can't recollect. And then I asked, oh, which film is this? They said, Tezab. And I said, oh, I haven't even seen it, but I saw the film. So they would censor everything. So if there was a temple, you would see a bright sun and a tree with a bright sun. If there was a song with Indian heroes and heroines dancing around, you would see the same photo back again. If you were watching World Cup football and the Brazilian fans who are skimpily dressed, you would see the photo of a stadium and not the women fans. So it was a very anachronistic society. It has opened up. It has changed. It is, again, the trend is towards change. Yes, it still is a very difficult place. I learned more about India in Saudi Arabia than here, because when I was Consul General, there were like about 100,000 Indians coming for Hajj. They come from different parts of India. Many of them have not even sat on a plane in their lives. They think they are speaking in the language you think you know, but they are speaking some other language in a local dialect which you will never understand. Because they think they're speaking in Hindi, and I know Hindi reasonably well, but they're speaking in a Hindi which I can't understand. So I learned a lot about India working in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, of course, is now a country on the move, like us. It's opening up. It's much more difficult for them, but if you see where they are started from and where they are today, the drift is clear. They are also opening up.
So those were two questions from political science people, Bhim and Abir Khatun. The next one, I'll let Shaji, who's on the faculty at political science, ask the question himself. Shaji? Hello, Shaji? Are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing your memories of your HCU days. Like you, I was also a student in the Department of Political Science, and currently I'm teaching in the department, and I'm teaching international relations. And you have studied international relations in HCU long back in the 80s, and you developed interest in international relations. And you were actually talking about your interest in IR in comparison with other subfields in political science. And my question is, as a practitioner of international relations, how do you perceive the possibilities of IR teaching outside Delhi settings? And what could be the motivations that students can pick up from IR, outside Delhi settings? And I would like to know your take on this, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very interesting question. And I think you have a point. And that point is that we cannot have a view of India only emanating from what is thought in Delhi. And that's because, for example, in Kerala, people look at the world very differently from how they would look in Delhi. And I can tell you my own experience. When I joined the Foreign Service, I hadn't been to Delhi many times except for some interviews, etc. So Pakistan was not a factor in my worldview at all. However, in the worldview of all those who grew up in Delhi, because some of their grandparents came from their other side, some of their parents came from other side, their experiences, etc. were very different. In my experience, this was a country which was somewhere far off. Sometimes it created problems for us, but other than that, it was not a factor in my life. But in the life of people in Delhi, it looms very large, disproportionately large. So obviously, there is a case for looking at these things from beyond Delhi. That said, how do we go about it? There are 2 or 3 things I think we need to take it up. Globalization, whether people like it or not, is a phenomenon that is here to stay. You will have, for example, every time there is a problem of students in United States, I can guarantee you there will be some students from Andhra Pradesh. They may not be students from Delhi at all, but there will always be some students from Andhra Pradesh involved. Similarly, if there is some accident or incident in Saudi Arabia, there will always be somebody from Kerala who's been involved in that. It's just that different parts of the world are connected with different parts of our own country in different ways. So there is a business model available if you can tap it to say that the business of diplomacy is not very different from the business of business. And it's important for people who are engaged in business to look at the business of diplomacy and to engage in international relations. When there is a crisis, you will always have to fall back on government because, as I told you, foreign policy is not a private enterprise. It will be inevitably an enterprise led by governments in our foreseeable future. So how do businesses benefit from that? And I think there are efforts made in some other parts of our country where they're proving to be useful. For example, in Mumbai, the Gulf, Mumbai oil, Mumbai industry, there are many streams of international relations theory and practice that are more appealing to Mumbai than to Delhi. Similarly, there will be 2 people here in our part of the country, the linkages with software. I know of young people, not now, but some time ago, all my wife's family, when they are in 10th class, they already know what is 5 years down the line, what they should study to get some H-1B visa in the US. Because their uncle or cousin or nephew or somebody has gone there, they have learned to game the system. They know what they should study, what language they should know to program to go there. So there are these strong bonds of people to people which are now available. You, of course, have to translate them into a business proposition. Because for Delhi, there is no business proposition required because they are only looking at geopolitics. And geopolitics is an easy venture to go on because it's only governments who are involved in. Businesses are more difficult. They will require more effort, but there are opportunities available and people need to look at them. It requires sustained effort. It requires somebody with talent and willingness to put in that effort. But it's time, it is something which will happen. It happened in New York, for example. Although DC has think tanks in Washington, New York has think tanks, LA has think tanks, etc. And that's the way to go about. It will take time, but the future trajectory, again, in my view, is pretty clear.
There are 3 more questions if you have the time. Mr. Akbaruddin. One is from Fani Krishna, cognitive science PhD student. Can you comment on the rising power of India internationally in terms of building power relations, trade, and so on?
So, let me put it this way. From my own experience, what I see is India has exponentially increased its ability to engage countries outside, very diverse countries, countries you would not even think of. Because thanks to all of you, our economy has done well for over a large number of years, going back to the 1991 onwards. We have now the capacity and the resources. So during this COVID crisis, for example, more than 100 countries benefited from medicines provided by India of different types. More than 100. You will, many of you will not even know that these countries are active, but they are active and players. Let me put it another way. In the UN system, there are 193 countries, of whom 110 have populations of less than 10 million. Those will be naturally the places where many times our experimentation also works for them. You know, India is like a cauldron of many experiments. We are doing experiments in Telangana or Andhra or Tamil Nadu, etc. Some work. Some of those also work elsewhere. It's only we need to know how to harness them and to then use them in our projection of power outside. It's a challenge because we also have other challenges, but in pure terms, 25 years ago, who would think that India would contribute nearly 3 billion to Afghanistan's reconstruction? 10 years ago, would anybody think that we would contribute more than $1 billion to Bangladesh? Would we build houses, 50,000 houses in Sri Lanka? I mean, there are numerous examples of how Indian tangible contributions are playing a role. It will not be seen today because these things are under the radar. Down the line, these will come in handy. And we just have to bide our time. In the meantime, we also have to address 300 to 400 million people in India who are in difficult circumstances. Because we cannot have an India where inequalities continue to go sharply and we can be models for outside world. So we will have, it's a difficult balancing act. We will have to do that balancing act on both domestic and the global front.
One question has come directly to do with academic curricula and institutions. Darla Venkateswara Rao, who is a professor in the Department of Telugu, wants to know, what's your opinion about the university teaching evaluation system and how does it compare with other institutions, and what type of changes would you recommend?
I think, you know, I'm not a sage on the stage. I cannot advise. There are professors and others who are better qualified to address this. I am an ordinary diplomat who has some knowledge of international issues. So I will leave this to the experts to decide. Please excuse me from answering that question.
Fair enough. Zahid, you have a question. Can you ask the question yourself? Zahid?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead. Zahidullah teaches in the Department of Urdu, Mr. Akbaruddin.
Good afternoon, Shri Akbaruddin, Syed Akbaruddin Sahab. I am Zahidullah. I teach here in Department of Urdu. My question is, do you see any material change in the bilateral relations between India, China, US, etc. post-COVID pandemic world, keeping in mind the WHO, its funding and the control?
the COVID situation or the crisis has accentuated some trends which were there before. It's not that the COVID crisis has brought in fundamentally new issues. So the issues of lack of trust, of geopolitical tensions, of unwillingness to believe each other were already there in many forms before. Those have come to the fore during the crisis. As it happens in the crisis, you know, if you put anybody under a magnifying glass, you will find warts for everybody. It is normal because we are all human. We all have human frailties. So many systems, the frailties are coming out. Sometimes it's very difficult to accept those frailties. Between India, China, and the US, there were underpinning problems of an incipient nature which have grown up. Now, for example, you cannot have a sustained globalization and then, as a public good, not share information at the earliest time. Otherwise, this flies in the face of normal interconnectedness growing. So people will have to address those issues. It's on the face of it, it may look simple, but it's a very complex issue that you can't say that don't stop flights and then have people carrying virus everywhere. These are very difficult issues which will have to be handled. There are no easy solutions to these, but it has certainly enhanced or worsened the geopolitical distrust among big powers.
Okay. Professor Vasanthi, are you there? Professor Vasanthi teaches in the Department of Political
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, Professor Vasanthi.
Hear me? Yeah, Mr. Akbaruddin, it's so nice to see you because Rajan always inspired us. I was in GT too, and he always said you can achieve many things. I am back in the department. I teach political philosophy. I just wanted we've been exploiting your name routine while we do websites and all kinds of promotional materials. But we are now in the process of putting together and anchoring a program on human security, which is multidisciplinary. And I thought we will exploit you further and get your first thoughts on this. Would this mean a dilution of political science program as it is, or would you think this is a move in the right direction? Thank you.
Ma'am, thank you very much. We both have the same mentors, so we are in some way siblings,
Yes.
although at different times we've been through this same grinder. Now, the issue of human security is an evolving issue. And in evolving issues, there are no finalities. Yes, classical political science will always feel this is a diversion. But that's what they felt about international relations 50 years ago or 75 years ago. Human security at this stage is a evolving issue even in the practice of international relations. In fact, one of the issues of whether the Security Council should address the COVID issue or not hinges on this very question of, in 21st century, are we now going to neglect issues of a public security nature which are so important? They are more important than skirmishes. In a skirmish, 20 people may die or 100 people may die, but in these sort of public security health issues, hundreds, thousands may die, or maybe more than that may die. Similarly, climate change. Climate change can impact on your security without one bullet being fired, one person being killed by anyone. It is being killed by factors which are beyond your control. So is it an issue for discussion in terms of peace and security or not? These are all issues which are now emerging. Obviously, academics should be in the forefront because we diplomats pick up from you. If you do not wish to proceed or on the frontiers, there is no hope for others, because diplomats by nature are conservative. They look at others. Is there a precedent? Is there an example of it? And only after years of it do we then use these things. So if you are thinking of it, it is in keeping with intellectual awareness that you address it. How you do it is again a choice of yours. But if you ask in generic terms, I would think if our academics don't touch frontier issues, who will?
Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody has asked about an earlier alumnus. This is Ashish Kumar via Facebook. We had one more UH alumnus, Sri V.V. Rao, who became IFS and was at the Afghanistan mission. We know he passed away in the Kabul attack in 2008. Did you have any interaction with him? If so, would you like to share?
Yes, he was a young man who I knew. I didn't know when he was in the University of Hyderabad. But in the foreign service, again, as I said, we are totally about 800. So most of us know each other. V.V. Rao was a very bright and very outgoing person. Also very friendly. We never got to discuss about the University of Hyderabad because every time we discussed many other things. So there was no interaction on this. His wife remains an active member in the foreign service family. It is sometimes we opt for difficult situations, not knowing what fate has destined for us. So usually in the foreign service, you do 2 postings and then you return to the headquarters, usually. If you want to do a third, then option comes off in terms of our choices. You have to do difficult places. V.V. Rao, for whatever his choice, opted to go to Afghanistan. At that time, we all knew Afghanistan was difficult, but we didn't know what lies in store for Indian diplomats because it had not happened before. It's sad. We will always miss him. But his spirit of willing to go to difficult situations in the service of the country remains an inspiration for many young diplomats in the Indian Foreign Service.
Thank you for that interaction. Oh, there's one more which has just come up. Aparna, Vinod Pavarala has said, Aparna has a question through his connection. Professor Vinod, please go ahead. Is he on? Yes.
Yeah. Ambassador Akbaruddin, this is Aparna Raiprol. I teach sociology at the university. I'm also an alumnus like Vinod and like you and Padmaji. We also met at Golden Threshold. Good friends with Ruxana. And, but here I'm talking as someone who has been involved with the internationalization of the University of Hyderabad. I was involved with setting up the Study in India program, where we had several foreign students come in, and we became the only university in the country to be able to bring in so many. We started in 1998, and they used to do what you know as a typical study abroad. Come and spend a semester here, and several, mostly from American universities, but also from Europe. And we started doing summer and short-term programs on contemporary India, and for Nordic students as well. We have something called the Nordic Center in India. Now we are, facing a major crisis, and the number of students, even in the last few years, post Nirbhaya actually started dropping. Because most of the foreign students who were coming were young women. That was one of the reasons. And so what we were at our peak, say, until about 2012 to 2014. And after 2014, it started dropping. So from 1998, when we started with 9 students, we used to have 200 students a year. But what I'm getting at, and what I would like your advice and inputs as, how do we get international students come to the university? Of course, we have the other international wing where we have people come in to do their masters, sometimes to do their MPhil and PhD. Again, we are facing some problems with that as well. But in this, particularly in this COVID crisis and the aftermath, how do we actually bring international students back to the university? And we've talked so much about rankings. We don't rank very high among the numbers of students to come in. So it would be nice to get some advice from you on that. Thank you. Thank you.
Ma'am, if I can quickly respond, what you told is about interest in India or India-related programs from largely the West. There is a world beyond the West.
Yes, yes.
And increasingly, it can't be purely a pursuit of an academic nature. You have to engage with government agencies, because this is in a form a promotion of better understanding of India in various ways. Increasingly, there are many in Africa who are looking at studying in India. I understand that some of the largest number of students now coming in to India are from, for example, Democratic Republic of Congo. It's Francophone country. They want to learn English, and English get plugged into the English-speaking world, etc. So, as Africa's needs for educational opportunities grows, you're looking at 200 in a world population of 7 billion is not much if you can tap into the right places. Foundations, funds, Government of India, these are very many opportunities who will have to work with you. Otherwise, you can't do this on your own. So the pathway to these is to plug it in and show it as a promotion of Indian philosophy or culture or whatever it is, and not to the usual culprits. The usual culprits will do it either for interest or not, or for other ways. They will find ways. But you have to go to uncharted territory. And there are large amount of interest in India. And as our economy grows, and interest in India will grow. Like people now, suddenly everybody wants to be a China specialist, because suddenly they seem to know, oh, do you know Mandarin? Do you understand Chinese intentions, etc. and all. Even in the foreign service, those who've done China are now in greater demand than they were otherwise.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Were you saying something more, Aparna?
No, I just said thank you.
All right. Okay. Right. I'll thank you, Mr. Akbaruddin. I'll now hand you back to Professor Prakash Babu and the Vice Chancellor Prof. Appa for a summation question from, I think, Professor Prakash Babu, and a formal vote of thanks.
Yeah, so Ambassador Akbaruddin has one question. It's not a question, it's a suggestion that I seek from you.
My quick point is that we need to look at newer options, newer opportunities, perhaps Africa, perhaps East Europe, perhaps Latin America, where there is a lot of interest. Let us not confine ourselves to the usual catchment areas. I'm sorry, sometimes the connection goes off, and I apologize.
Thank you for that, Mr. Akbaruddin, for your very patient responses to several questions. I now hand you back to Professor Prakash Babu and Professor Appa for, I think, Professor Prakash Babu has a formal question as well, and a formal vote of thanks. Mr. Prakash Babu?
Sir, I have one question. Though this university is mostly academic oriented, but could not produce many civil servants. So for the last few years, somehow the University of Hyderabad is encouraging to start small coaching it's like a coaching and guidance for the students who would like to attempt for the civil services. Keeping a present circumstance and number of positions are, I came to know that they are getting reduced for various reasons. So what is your suggestion for the students in this?
So as I said, it's a matter of passion. If you think that academics is what ignites your passion, they should proceed. But all I can say is that civil services do provide opportunities for people to follow their passions. There are immense opportunities, whether in diplomacy, but also in the administrative services or other services, which will give you satisfaction in your work. The opportunities are there, but it will increasingly become difficult for people to go through the hoops because the competition is tough and it is getting tougher. But there is no reason for a university like the University of Hyderabad not to do well. You are doing well in so many other parameters. If you want to do well, if you focus even 1/10 of what you are focusing on other things, you will get more people in, I'm certain. It's only a matter of putting focus and putting the effort. All of you have done wonderfully well. Irrespective of whether you want to focus in this area or not, we all are proud of our achievements. But if this can be added to, it will be great.
So we'd like to say, Professor Appa would like to say a few words, then I will wind up.
Dr. Akbaruddin, first of all, I would like to thank you for joining. And in fact, I'm very happy that in the first few minutes that you mentioned about the university, the USPs you have touched upon, they continue to be the same today in this university. The personal attention that you have mentioned, that you had an opportunity because you are limited number of students and then good number of faculty. And even today we are proud to say that we try to maintain the same student-teacher ratio, something close to 1:11. And we are trying to bring it down to 1:10. And very few institutions in India have this opportunity, and we are trying to maintain that over the years. And the second important thing that, although as a student of social sciences, you have touched upon the most important one, that the CIL. CIL, it's not easy for social science students to remember how important is the CIL, how unique was the concept of CIL those days. And probably such of those things have put the university in the forefront from those days. And as an alumnus, in the first 10 years, you have studied in the very first 10 years of this existence of this university, and you have rightly picked up those USPs of the university. And I'm happy that you mentioned about passion-driven career. This is something which I'm sure several of our colleagues who have joined, they all appreciate it, and they all had passion for it when they are in academics. And those who are not in academics also have their own passion there, and then they're pursuing their career. And I think this is going to be, I do not know how many students had an opportunity to join through the Facebook. I'm sure that was a very good suggestion from your side, with all the experience behind, that you go with the passion and then do your things in the long career. And the last point that you made is another important point I felt, that is addressing the point raised by Professor Aparna. Aparna has been instrumental in fact, internationalization of this university. Before that, very few, maybe we could count on fingers if there were some foreign students for any course. But the initiative that she has taken and the time that she has spent on the Study in India program really has put the University of Hyderabad in the world map. Well, that's where I take you. We are also thinking about alternative ways, not necessarily because for different reasons actually. You said that world is not only the West, and because also there are other reasons as to why we may not be able to attract them. So we are looking for definitely the new opportunities that you have mentioned about, and the team that we have now, the Study in India program team, the director of that, and then we have also an Office of International Affairs, there is a director, and of course they're always guided by the people who have served for the Study in India program or international affairs, like Professor Aparna, we know all of them have been always guiding them. I'm sure with this tagline, the new opportunity, we have to see the newer partners, and we have to reach out to those places where, because this is one of the mandates of the Institution of Eminence for us, is to increasingly available for the international students. I think this is something which we are working, and Pramod, the one who has coordinated, is the director for the IOE, Institution of Eminence program. So you all see your juniors and those who have studied in this university are in a good position, and they're taking good care of your university. And I'm sure we would like to have some more distinguished, some of our alumni who have been in different spheres also participating in this kind of activities on a regular basis. This will be an inspiration for the university, inspiration for the students, and inspiration for the faculty. In fact, we have a good number of our alumni as faculty at University of Hyderabad. And I think if I recall correctly, it's close to 35% of our faculty are alumni of University of Hyderabad. And we are doing well, and thank you very much for joining, and thank you so much.
Yeah, let me say a few words. Sir, I profusely thank for sparing your time and being with us despite your busy schedule, and since you have come back very recently. So I'm really thankful for you, sir. So for your time, and also once the normalcy has reached to the country, maybe we would like to invite you in person to the university to show all the things and all the places where you have been, and also to have a direct interaction with the faculty and the students, sir. We request you one more time, so once it is normalcy. So I thank you, sir. So I also thank our Vice Chancellor for kindly encouraging the University of Hyderabad, the Alumni Association, and also organizing such a kind of events. And I thank Pranay Rupani, who is actually instrumental in organizing backup and all. I thank Pramod for question answer session coordinating. I thank PRO for which actually he is the one of the instrumental person in this. I thank all my colleagues, students, and staff, and also our computer science director is here. Is the actually making our lives very easy. And I thank each and everybody behind this. I thank you once again. I thank the participants on even the Facebook also. So thank you, sir. We'll see you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.